And longer than a century, alas, a day.
We are all quite familiar with the zombie apocalypse genre by now. Whether it's in the movies, books, or any other fictional work, there is usually a main character, someone we sympathize the most, who is doing everything they can to survive while fleeing from hordes of hungry zombies. But as for the zombies themselves, we couldn't care less. Who cares that one of them had a cat? Another dreamed of becoming an actor. And the third has just recently been able to afford a car. In the movies, the heroes are always terrified of being torn apart, becoming food for monsters, fearing the pain, but what happens afterward doesn't really concern anyone. After all, once you are infected, it's no longer you. It's just a mannequin with your face, just a body wandering around the world. But in reality, things are a bit more complicated. Or perhaps it's more accurate to say they are much more scarier. Losing your memory, being stripped of your will, remaining alive but essentially becoming a dead man walking. It's not that difficult, and it's not something that only exists in the movies or books. Right now, under the right circumstances, any of us could become a zombie. Today you will learn how living people were turned into zombies, not in the movies or books, but right here, on our own planet, where we all live. Let me tell you up front, this story is true. It's not fiction or theory, just the raw truth. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button because this is loud and I'm sorry for the video. Okay, let's go back in time to the vast plains of East Asia, where the land is so flat that you can see the person approaching you from miles away. From the 4th to the 6th century, the territory belonged to the Rauran Khaganate. A Khaganate is a state of nomads, and these guys were extremely cruel. They were a fiery mix of Asian mentality and a rather harsh shamanistic religion, which undoubtedly contributed to their merciless nature. So what, you might ask? On the battlefield, being ruthless means staying alive. And even today we are all familiar with the concept. Nowadays, the moral boundaries dedicated by society are stronger than ever. You know, don't kill, don't steal, something like that. Imagine those distant years, fighting to the death. There was no time to think about mercy. In short, it's easy to justify ruthlessness on the battlefield, even today. But it's an entirely different matter when it comes to cruelty towards prisoners. Oh, how many dozens and hundreds of cruel tortures human history has known, but these nomads, the Raurans, came up with the most terrifying one. They learn how to strip a person of their memory, their character, turning them into a mankurt, a dumb body, capable only of following its master's commands. This nightmare awaited only the young men and boys who were unlucky enough to survive after the battle. Yes, I didn't misspeak. It was indeed unlucky to survive, because even death would have been a more pleasant end. So, here's a quick DIY method of how to make zombies at home. Captured slaves had their heads shaved clean, every hair meticulously scrubbed away. Then a fresh piece of camel hide, cut from the thickest part of the hump, was taken and immediately placed, still warm, on their heads. The hide adhered almost instantly, as if glued in place. This was the beginning of the process, known as shiwi. Next, these people were taken into a desert, their necks champed in a wooden stock, ensuring they couldn't touch the ground with their heads to remove the hide. They were left there without any food or water for 5 to 6 days, suffering under the relentless sun, tormented by burns, exhaustion, and terror. The cries echoed through the desert. But there was no one to hear. As they passed, the freshly shaved hair began to grow back, slowly and painfully. The thick hair of Asians, despite its strength, could not penetrate the camel hide. The hairs curled back like thousands of needles, drilling into their skulls, driving them insane. When the overseers returned, it was considered a stroke of luck if 2 out of 8 captives survived. Those who did were given water, food, and care to recover. But they were never the same. Their past was left behind in the desert, absorbed into the earth, along with their tears and blood. The Shiri had consumed their past. They were now what might be called MANKURTS, as the term zombie didn't exist just yet. They were highly valued in the market. One MANKURT was worth 10 ordinary slaves. This was because a MANKURT had no free will. He didn't act on his own, living only by the commands of his master. Deprived of memory, a person couldn't rebel. Minimal food and rags were all that was needed for a MANKURT to perform endless hard labor. Typically, they were ordered to do monotonous tasks that required mindless patience. For instance, MANKURTs were often sent to herd camels, where one could replace a dozen regular herders. The work of the writer Chingiz Aytmatov mentions the legend of a young Neyman who was captured by the Juans and turned into a MANKURT. After a bloody battle, a group of Neymans returned to their village. The men told how the young man had been struck by an arrow, caught in his stirrup and dragged by his horse into the lands of the Juans. Years passed, and even his closest friends lost hope of ever seeing him again. But his lonely mother couldn't accept this. Filled with fear and hope, she ventured into the desert. After many nights, the woman came upon a vast herd of camels. She nearly fainted when she recognized her son in the grim-faced herder. He stood there, holding a cap on his head, watching over the camels. The mother tried to persuade Neyman to return to the village, but he didn't recognize her. Neyman remembered nothing, but his body still expertly handled a bow and arrow. According to the legend, under his master's orders, he shot his own mother. He didn't even look back as she fell into the sand, sobbing and pleading with the MANKURTs in his father's name. Alright, this next story is from our modern era. In 1932, anthropologists discovered a Papuan tribe in the mountains of New Guinea, a tribe previously unknown to the world. The scientists named the indigenous people the Four and eagerly began studying their way of life. It's rare for scientists to have a chance to study primitive tribes, especially with the living subjects. In 1949, missionaries joined the scientists in visiting the Papuans to spread the word of God and teach love for one's neighbor. However, they were already too late. The savages had already very clear understanding what it meant to love your neighbor. As soon as the missionaries witnessed their version of love, they immediately turned around and boarded the first available ship, desperate to return to the mainland. The reason? Well, the Papuans of the Four tribe were cannibals. Shocking revelation indeed! Ritual cannibalism was an integral part of their natural cycle of birth and death. What does this mean? Let me explain with a simple example. When your great-grandfather died, he was mourned, prayed, and buried, according to the Christian customs, with his body returned to the earth. This is the Christian ritual of saying goodbye for the deceased. But if the Papuan of the New Guinea had attended to the funeral, he would have been outraged. The deceased has not been given a proper respect. He would have shouted, "Why didn't your woman bake and eat your great-grandfather's brain? What a disgrace!" Yep. And why is that? The fourth tribe believed that by eating the body of the deceased, they would gain the strength of the muscles and wisdom of their brains. When someone died, their relatives gathered around the body. They tore the skin with their bare hands, separated the flesh from the bones, and beat through the tendons. What a horror! The still warm pieces were placed in clay cylinders and thrown into the fire. Bone marrow, brains, meat, muscles, they ate everything. Only women and girls participated in this feast. The men of the tribe were vegetarians, subsisting solely on the fruits and sweet potatoes, known as yams. Remember this wild detail. The men were vegetarians, while the women of all ages feasted on their deceased elders. How charming! One of the researchers described how the savages eagerly awaited their gruesome delicacy. Meanwhile, the women wiped their hands along with their bodies and hair. They cleaned their wounds, scratched insect bites, wiped their children's eyes, and cleaned their noses. Soon, the women and children began to gather around the hearth, impatiently waiting for the cylinders to be opened, for the contents to be extracted, and for the feast to begin. Why am I telling you all of this? What the heck happened to the transformation into a zombie part of the video? Well, don't rush. It was important to tell you this story before explaining the main part. After witnessing these shocking rituals, the stunned Europeans began to closely observe the behavior of the indigenous people. They noticed a little girl, no older than 7, standing near a hut. She was trembling, her hands moving uncontrollably over her body, and her head swayed like a pendulum. Her appearance resembled that of a zombie. The researchers, taken aback by this sight, asked the natives what was wrong with the girl. They were told that the girl was unlucky. She had been cursed. The locals genuinely believed it was a curse, a form of witchcraft they called KURU. They said she would no longer be able to eat, and within 2 weeks, death awaited her. Anthropologists were certain that KURU was a disease. However, none of them could determine exactly what kind. The symptoms were too strange, and the cause too mysterious. After all, among those who fell into the deadly grip of KURU, there were almost no men. This so-called curse affected mostly girls and women. You probably guessed what was behind the emergence of this disease, just as the Professor Carlton GOTHIC did. Noticing that the illness always led to dementia, he realized that the brain was being affected. Upon examining the brains of the diseased individuals, GOTHIC found that it had turned spongy, much like that of a zombie. Some parts of the brain appeared as they had been removed or burned away by red-hot iron. The destruction of the cerebellum caused tremors and convulsions, including the locking of facial muscles. In some cases, this resulted in ghastly smile that stayed with the patients until their death. In essence, the Papuans, by consuming the brains of their deceased relatives, like zombies, were contracting a horrifying disease that turned them into a real-life zombies. GOTHIC determined that KURU was a prion infection, a discovery that earned him a Nobel Prize in 1976. Oh, and by the way, the money he received from the prize was donated to the tribe. So, what do we know? The disease spread through the ritual cannibalism, specifically the consumption of the brains of those affected with it. The terrifying part is that KURU has an incredibly long incubation period, up to 27 years. This means that you could have eaten your grandfather's brain at age 10, back when you were living with a tribe, and the first symptoms wouldn't appear until you were 37, by which time you might be respected individual, far removed from the indigenous people. Fortunately, cannibalism in the tribe was eventually eradicated, so things are somewhat under control. However, due to this long incubation period, new cases of infection still occasionally emerge. So, in order not to become sick or turn into a zombie, please avoid eating other humans. Yep, even on holidays. Alright, that's it for today. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you love that sort of stuff as much as I do. I'll see you very soon with a very big video about one of the most ancient monsters of our planet. Well, see you soon.